Hello everyone, this video is about Chapter 9, Lesson 3, Fermentation, textbook pages 262 to 265. The objectives: we'll be able to explain how organisms get energy in the absence of oxygen and identify the pathways the body uses to release energy during exercise. So we have already mentioned before in the previous videos how cellular respiration occurs and how we get the food or the energy from the food that we eat. So we use oxygen to release chemical energy from the food we eat, but what if oxygen is not around? Is there a pathway that allows cells to extract energy from food in the absence of oxygen? And how do organisms generate energy when oxygen is not available? So this is through the process called fermentation. So what is fermentation? Fermentation is a process by which energy can be released from food molecules in the absence of oxygen. So again, this releases the food or the energy from the food molecules by producing ATP. Fermentation process occurs in the cytoplasm of the cells, just like glycolysis process. Under anaerobic conditions, anaerobic meaning it does not require oxygen, fermentation follows glycolysis, as you can see from the figure. Here, glycolysis first, and then after that, you have the alcoholic fermentation or the lactic fermentation. So during the fermentation process, the cells convert the NADH produced by the glycolysis, look at the figure, back into the electron carrier NAD+, so which allows glycolysis to continue producing ATP. So here you have from glycolysis you have produced the NADH from the NAD+, and then again this fermentation returns back this NAD+ into glycolysis process so that it could continue produce the ATP. So again, I have mentioned already there are two types of fermentation, the alcoholic and lactic fermentation. So let's have first the alcoholic fermentation. Yeast and a few other microorganisms use alcoholic fermentation that produces ethyl alcohol and carbon dioxide. This process is used to produce alcoholic beverages and causes bread dough to rise. If you are familiar with baking, we used yeast as our ingredient in making the bread so the dough could rise. So the chemical equation for alcoholic fermentation is that pyruvic acid and NADH as our raw materials will yield alcohol plus carbon dioxide plus the NAD plus. Okay. In lactic acid fermentation, most organisms, including humans, carry out fermentation using chemical reaction that converts pyruvic acid to lactic acid fermentation or to lactic acid. So the equation would be pyruvic acid plus the NADH will yield lactic acid instead of alcohol plus the NAD plus. Okay. So how does the body produce ATP during different stages of exercise? For short, quick bursts of energy, the body uses ATP already in muscles, as well as ATP by lactic acid fermentation. So for example, for exercises longer than about 90 seconds, cellular respiration is the only way to continue generating a supply of oxygen. Of ATP rather. Cells normally contain small amounts of ATP produced during cellular respiration. enough for a few seconds of intense activity. But lactic acid fermentation can supply enough ATP to last about 90 seconds. However, extra oxygen is required to get rid of the lactic acid produced. Following intense exercise, a person will huff and puff for several minutes in order to pay back the built-up oxygen debt and clear the lactic acid from the body. So again, in lactic acid fermentation, since it does not require the oxygen, then it could produce more of the ATP. But then again, we need this oxygen also to get rid of the lactic accumulation in the body. For long-term energy, intense exercises lasting longer than 90 seconds, cellular respiration is required to continue production of ATP. Cell respiration releases energy more slowly than fermentation does. Why is it so? Because we've mentioned again, in cell respiration we require oxygen, but in fermentation we do not. The body stores energy in the form of carbohydrate glycogen. These glycogen stores are enough to last for 15 to 20 minutes of activity. After that, the body begins to break down other stored molecules, including fats, for energy. So just like these hibernating animals, like this brown bear and some other organisms or animals that undergo hibernation, they rely on stored fat for energy when they sleep through the winter. That's it for the lesson for this fermentation. Let's move on now to the summary. Fermentation releases energy from food molecules by producing ATP without oxygen. Cells convert NADH to the electron carrier NAD+. This allows glycolysis to produce a steady stream of ATP. There are two forms of fermentation. Both start with the reactants pyruvic acid and NADH. Alcoholic fermentation produces ethyl alcohol and carbon dioxide. It occurs in yeast and a few other organisms or microorganisms. It also produces alcoholic beverages and causes bread dough to rise. While lactic acid fermentation produces lactic acid, it occurs in most organisms, including humans, used to produce beverages as well, such as buttermilk, and foods such as cheese, yogurt, and pickles. Energy and exercises. The body uses different pathways to release energy. For short, quick bursts of energy, the body uses ATP already in muscles, as well as ATP made by lactic acid fermentation. For exercise longer than about 90% or 90 seconds rather, cellular respiration is the only way to continue generating a supply of ATP. So that's it for the lesson on fermentation. Thank you for watching.